Hello, welcome to Storytime with Moog. I am Moog, and today we are reading Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, starting with Part 5, Chapter 2. But first, reading updates. I started Uzumaki by Junji Ito yesterday, and if you weren't around yesterday, I was reading it silently, so like just through sprints, but I was reading it like on screen, and there were visual reactions to what I was reading. Okay, so Junji Ito is a manga horror writer. And it is just very terrifying. But the synopsis that I'm about to give is not terrifying at all. But just know that it is. So it takes place in this smaller community in Japan, and spirals are just taking over. That's the whole basic plot of it. Is that the spirals have contaminated this town, and each chapter is getting deeper and deeper and deeper into this spiral, and each chapter is almost like a mini story that deals with the spiral. We do have our two main characters. Of course, I don't remember their names. Shuichi is the boyfriend. Oh, and Kiri is our main character. And it's just like them living through this weird, wild time. And I wish that I could show you a picture, but literal almost every single picture would be a spoiler. So let me just show you like the first page. Okay. So the first page is actually in color. The rest of it is black and white, but the detailing is just so beautiful. This is also not a spoiler page, but it's just so beautiful. And like the first chapter, you get like obsession with spiral, and then the second chapter, you get like phobia of spiral. And there are so many different spirals in this book. And after reading it, or after the sprint, I was like, yeah, I'm going to finish this on Friday. It's so good. There's like 600 pages, 600 something pages. And then I just finished it yesterday. I just couldn't put it down. I couldn't put it down. But it is so disturbing, so, I don't know, like terrifying. And yeah, so now that I've read it, I'm also seeing in real life just how many spirals there are. There's so many spirals. It's I'm at a loss for words. It's an easy 5-star for me. It's so good. But yeah, I read Uzumaki by Junji Ito, and it is going to be an animation coming out soon. Next week, maybe? But I'm really excited for that as well. And I think that's all my reading update. I just read this all yesterday. It's worth it. If you like horror, it's also the type of horror that is, because it is graphic, like a graphic novel, it is in some ways more terrifying because you're not subject to your own imagination, which I guess is also scary, but like, I don't know what I'm saying. Because it's graphic, it is a picture's worth 1,000 words. Okay, we're done because I'm just ruining the description of it. I'm just ruining it. Anyway, today we are reading Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. I don't remember what happened last time at all. Okay, let's see if we can remember. Levin proposed to Kitty once again and said yes. Kitty's parents are excited, said yes, but Levin needs to go to church and like repent for all of his sins. So that was an interesting little moment there. And let's see. Levin also had to tell Kitty two things. One, that he is not pure, and two, that he's not religious. And Kitty was like, I can deal with you not being religious. I am religious enough for the both of us, but you not being pure is going to be an issue. We're still going to get married, but just know that you're disgusting. And so he now is obsessing over, or will always be carrying the idea that he is lesser than Kitty. So there's that. Let's see. What has happened with Anna and Vronsky and Alexei? Well, see, I don't remember where it started last time, so I need to like just think back, I guess. Okay, Vronsky shot himself, thinking that he was going to end his life, but he missed, and he shot himself in the arm. And this was because Anna has decided that she loves her husband. And Vronsky, like, saw it in her face, blah, blah, blah. Alexei has decided that he is going to continue to stay married to Anna, but Anna can see Vronsky when she wants. It's, let's see, a whole thing. My little goldfish brain is trying so hard to remember. Let's see. Vronsky is going to be traveling for work, and he wants to see Anna one more time. His initial answer to that was no, and then he heard yes. So he immediately goes to Anna, and Anna is like, oh, meh, 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 meh. And Vronsky is like, meh, 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 meh. And now Anna is going with Vronsky while he travels for work, but still staying married to Alexei. And Siroiza, Anna and Alexei's son, is staying with Alexei. I feel like there's more, but I think those are like the big things that happened last time. We didn't hop around with characters too many times, but we'll see. I guess we'll do it. We all know that Tolstoy is really good at reminding us of things, so if I forgot to mention anything, he will definitely remind us. So, let's do it. Part 5, Chapter 2. On the day of the wedding, according to the Russian custom, the princess and Darya Alexandrovna insisted on strictly keeping all the customs. Levin did not see his betrothed and dined at his hotel with 3 bachelor friends, casually brought together at his rooms. These were Sergei Ivanovich, Katavasov, a university friend, now professor of natural science, whom Levin had met in the street and insisted on taking home with him, and Chirikov, his best man, a Moscow Conciliation Board judge, Levin's companion in his bear hunts. The dinner was a very merry one. Sergei Ivanovich was in his happiest mood, and was much amused by Katavasov's originality. Katavasov, feeling his originality was appreciated and understood, made the most of it. Chirikov always gave a lively and good-humored support to conversation of any sort. "See now," said Katavasov, drawing his words from a habit acquired in the lecture room. "What a capable fellow was our friend Konstantin Dmitrievich. I'm not speaking of present company, for he's absent. At the time he left the university, he was fond of science, took an interest in humanity. Now, 1/2 of his abilities is devoted to deceiving himself, and the other to justifying the deceit. A more determined enemy of matrimony than you I never saw," said Sergei Ivanovich. "Oh no, I'm not an enemy of matrimony. I'm in favor of division of labor. People who can do nothing else ought to rear people while the rest work for their happiness and enlightenment. That's how I look at it. To muddle up 2 trades is the error of the amateur. I'm not one of their member." How happy I shall be when I hear that you're in love, said Levin. Please, invite me to the wedding. I'm in love now. Yes, with a cuttlefish, you know. Levin turned to his brother. Mikhail Simonovich is writing a work on the digestive organs of the... Now, make a muddle of it. It doesn't matter about what. And the fact is, I certainly do love cuttlefish. But that's no hindrance to your loving your wife. The cuttlefish is no hindrance. The wife is the hindrance. Why so? Oh, you see, you care about farming, hunting. Well, you'd better look out. Arhip was here today. He said there were a lot of elks in Prudno and 2 bears, said Chirikov. Well, you must go and get them without me. Ah, that's the truth, said Sergei Ivanovich. And you may say goodbye to bear hunting for the future. Your wife won't allow it. Levin smiled. The picture of his wife not letting him go was so pleasant that he was ready to renounce the delights of looking upon bears forever. Still, it's a pity they should get those 2 bears without you. Do you remember the last time at Hapilovo? That was a delightful hunt, said Chirikov. Levin had not the heart to disillusion him of the notion that there could be something delightful apart from her, and so said nothing. There's some sense in this custom of saying goodbye to bachelor life, said Sergei Ivanovich. However happy you may be, you must regret your freedom. And confess there is a feeling that you want to jump out of the window, like Gogol's bridegroom. Of course there is, but it isn't confessed, said Katavasov, and he broke into loud laughter. Ah, well, the window's open. Let's start off this instant to Tver, and there's a big she-bear. She can go right up to the lair. Seriously, let's go by the 5 o'clock. And here, let them do what they like, said Chirikov, smiling. Well, now, on my honor, said Levin, smiling, I can't find in my heart that feeling of regret for my freedom. Yes, there's such a chaos in your heart just now that you can't find anything there, said Katavasov. Wait a bit. When you set it to rights a little, you'll find it. No. If so, I should have felt a little apart from my feeling. He could not say love before them. And happiness, a certain regret at losing my freedom. On the contrary, I am glad at the very loss of my freedom. Awful. It's a hopeless case, said Katavasov. Well, let's drink to his recovery, or wish that 100th part of his dreams may be realized. And that would be happiness such as never has been seen on earth. Soon after dinner, the guests went away to be in time to be dressed for the wedding. When he was left alone and recalled the conversation of these bachelor friends, Levin asked himself, had he, in his heart, that regret for his freedom of which they had spoken? He smiled at the question. Freedom. What is freedom for? Happiness is only in loving and wishing her wishes, thinking her thoughts, that is to say, not freedom at all. That's happiness. But do I know her ideas, her wishes, her feelings? Some voice suddenly whispered to him. The smile died away from his face, and he grew thoughtful. And suddenly a strange feeling came upon him. There came over him a dread and doubt of everything. What if she does not love me? What if she's marrying me simply to be married? What if she doesn't see herself what she's doing? He asked himself. She may come to her senses, and only when she is being married realize that she does not and cannot love me. And strange, most evil thoughts of her began to come to him. He was jealous of Vronsky, as he had been a year ago, as though the evening he had seen her with Vronsky had been yesterday. He suspected she had not told him everything. He jumped up quickly. No, this can't go on, he said to himself in despair. I'll go to her. I'll ask her. I'll say for the last time, we are free, and hadn't we better stay so? Anything's better than endless misery, disgrace, unfaithfulness. With despair in his heart and bitter anger against all men, against himself, against her, he went out of the hotel and drove to her house. He found her in one of the back rooms. She was sitting on a chest and making some arrangements with her maid, sorting over heaps of dresses of different colors, spread on the backs of chairs and on the floor. "Oh," she cried, seeing him and beaming with delight. "Kostya, Konstantin Dmitrievich." These latter days, she used these names almost alternately. "I didn't expect you. I'm going through my wardrobe to see what's for whom." "Oh, that's very nice," he said gloomily, looking at the maid. "You can go, Dunyasha." "Dunyasha, I'll call you presently," said Kitty. "Kostya, what's the matter?" she asked, definitely adopting this formal name as soon as the maid had gone out. She noticed his strange face, agitated and gloomy, and a panic came over her. "Kitty, I'm in torture. I can't suffer alone," he said with despair in his voice, standing before her and looking imploringly into her eyes. He saw already from her loving, truthful face that nothing could come of what he had meant to say, but yet he wanted her to reassure him herself. "I've come to say that there's still time. This can all be stopped and set right." "What? I don't understand. What is the matter?" "What I have said 1,000 times over and can't help thinking, that I'm not worthy of you. You couldn't consent to marry me. Think a little. You've made a mistake. Think it over thoroughly. You can't love me. Better say so," he said, not looking at her. "I shall be wretched. Let people say what they like. Anything's better than misery. Far better, now, while there's still time." I don't understand," she answered, panic-stricken. "You mean you want to give it up? Don't want it?" "Yes, if you don't love me." "You're out of your mind," she cried, turning crimson with vexation. But his face was so piteous that she restrained her vexation, and flinging some clothes off an armchair, she sat down beside him. "What are you thinking? Tell me all." "I am thinking you can't love me. What can you love me for?" "My God, what can I do?" she said, and burst into tears. "Oh, what have I done?" he cried, and kneeling before her, he fell to kissing her hands. When the princess came into the room 5 minutes later, she found them completely reconciled. Kitty had not simply assured him that she loved him, but had gone so far, in answer to his question what she loved him for, as to explain what for. She told him that she loved him because she understood him completely, because she knew what he would like, and because everything he liked was good. And this seemed to him perfectly clear. When the princess came to them, they were sitting side by side on the chest, sorting the dresses and disputing over Kitty's wanting to give Dunyasha the brown dress she had been wearing when Levin proposed to her, while he insisted that that dress must never be given away, but Dunyasha must have the blue one. "How is it you don't see? She's a brunette, and it won't suit her. I've worked it all out." Hearing why he had come, the princess was half humorously, half seriously angry with him, and sent him home to dress and not to hinder Kitty's hairdressing, as Charles, the hairdresser, was just coming. "As it is, she's been eating nothing lately and is losing her looks, and then you must come and upset her with your nonsense," she said to him. "Get along with you, my dear." Levin, guilty and shamefaced, but pacified, went back to his hotel. His brother, Darya Alexandrovna, and Stepan Arkadyevitch, all in full dress, were waiting for him to bless him with the holy picture. There was no time to lose. Darya Alexandrovna had to drive home again to fetch her curled and pomaded son who was to carry the holy picture after the bride. Then a carriage had to be sent for the best man, and another that would take Sergei Ivanovich away would have to be sent back. Altogether, there were a great many most complicated matters to be considered and arranged. One thing was unmistakable, that there must be no delay, as it was already 6:30. Nothing special happened at the ceremony of benediction with the holy picture. Stepan Arkadyevich stood in a comically solemn pose behind his wife, took the holy picture, and telling Levin to bow down to the ground, he blessed him with his kindly, ironical smile and kissed him 3 times. Darya Alexandrovna did the same, and immediately was in a hurry to get off, and again plunged into the intricate question of the destinations of the various carriages. "Come, I'll tell you how we'll manage. You drive in the carriage to fetch him, and Sergei Ivanovich, if he'll be so good, will drive there and then send his carriage." "Of course, I shall be delighted." "We'll come on directly with him. Are your things sent off?" said Stepan Arkadyevich. "Yes," answered Levin, and he told Kuzma to put out his clothes for him to dress. End of chapter 2. All right. Day of the wedding. Okay, day of the wedding, we are with Levin. And Levin is starting to have doubts. Doubts because of who he's with. They're like, "Ooh, I don't know. Your wife is going to stop you from, hunting bears and from taking care of the land and all the things that you really enjoy doing. She's going to be a hindrance to you." And Levin is like, "Well, she's not going to be a hindrance because, my life is going to be spent, wishing with her wishes and hoping with her hopes and all of these things." And then he has a moment and he's like, what are her wishes? What are her hopes and her dreams? What does she want? I don't know anything. What if she doesn't love me? And starts going down this rabbit hole of maybe we shouldn't get married. Maybe she doesn't love me. And if she doesn't love me, then we shouldn't be married because we'll be, adulterating in the future. So he goes to Kitty. Kitty is just getting things ready, situated. It's the day of the wedding. She's busy. But he goes there and she is delighted to see him, of course. And she immediately sees that there's something wrong and asks him what's going on. And so she is then having to just console him and be like, no. Yes, I want to be married to you. Yes, I love you. These are the reasons what I love about you, all of these things. And then he is soothed and satisfied, and then he goes off, and then they go and get married. There's a lot of room and foreshadowing of things that can and probably will go wrong in their relationship. And I am excited for it. I'm so excited to see what happens. We shall see. Part 5, Chapter 3. A crowd of people, principally women, was thronging round the church lighted up for the wedding. Those who had not succeeded in getting into the main entrance were crowded about the windows, pushing, wrangling, and peeping through the gratings. More than 20 carriages had already been drawn up in ranks along the street by the police. A police officer, regardless of the frost, stood at the entrance, gorgeous in his uniform. More carriages were continually driving up, and ladies wearing flowers and carrying their trains, and men taking off their helmets or black hats kept walking into the church. Inside the church, both lustres were already lighted, and all the candles before the holy pictures. The gilt on the red ground of the holy picture stand, and the gilt relief on the pictures, and the silver of the lustres and candlesticks, and the stones of the floor and the rugs, and the banners above in the choir, and the steps of the altar, and the old blackened books, and the cassocks, and surplices, all were flooded with light. On the right side of the warm church, in the crowd of flock coats and white ties, uniforms and broadcloth, velvet, satin, hair and flowers, bare shoulders and arms and long gloves, there was discreet but lively conversation that echoed strangely in the high cupola. Every time there was heard the creak of the opened door, the conversation in the crowd died away, and everybody looked round, expecting to see the bride and bridegroom come in. But the door had opened more than 10 times, and each time it was either a belated guest or guests who joined the circle of the invited on the right, or a spectator who had eluded or softened the police officer and went to join the crowd of outsiders on the left. Both the guests and the outside public had by now passed through all the phases of anticipation. At first they imagined that the bride and bridegroom would arrive immediately, and attached no importance at all to their being late. Then they began to look more and more often towards the door, and to talk of whether anything could have happened. Then the long delay began to be positively discomforting, and relations and guests tried to look as if they were not thinking of the bridegroom, but were engrossed in conversation. The head deacon, as though to remind them of the value of his time, coughed impatiently, making the window panes quiver in their frames. In the choir, the bored choristers could be heard trying their voices and blowing their noses. The priests were continually sending first the beadle and then the deacon to find out whether the bridegroom had not come. More and more often, he went himself, in a lilac vestment and an embroidered sash, to the side door, expecting to see the bridegroom. At last, one of the ladies, glancing at her watch, said, "It really is strange, though." And all the guests became uneasy and began loudly expressing their wonder and dissatisfaction. One of the bridegroom's best men went to find out what had happened. Kitty, meanwhile, had long ago been quite ready, and in her white dress and long veil and wreath of orange blossoms, she was standing in the drawing-room of the Sherbatskoys' house with her sister, Madame Lvova, who was her bridal mother. She was looking out of the window, and had been for over half an hour anxiously expecting to hear from the best man that her bridegroom was at the church. Levin, meanwhile, in his trousers, but without his coat and waistcoat, was walking to and fro in his room at the hotel, continually putting his head out of the door and looking up and down the corridor. But in the corridor there was no sign of the person he was looking for, and he came back in despair, and frantically waving his hands, addressed Stepan Arkadyevitch, who was smoking serenely. "Was ever a man in such a fearful fool's position?" he said. "Yes, it is stupid," Stepan Arkadyevitch assented, smiling soothingly. "But don't worry, it'll be brought directly." "No, what is to be done?" said Levin, with smothered fury. "And these fools of open waistcoats, out of the question," he said, looking at the crumpled front of his shirt. "And what if the things have been taken on to the railway station?" he roared in desperation. "Then you must put mine on." "I ought to have done so long ago, if at all." "It's not nice to look ridiculous. Wait a bit. It will come round." The point was that when Levin asked for his evening suit, Kuzma, his old servant, had brought him the coat, waistcoat, and everything that was wanted. "But the shirt!" cried Levin. "You've got a shirt on," Kuzma answered with a placid smile. Kuzma had not thought of leaving out a clean shirt, and on receiving instructions to pack up everything and send it round to the Sherbatskoys' house, from which the young people were to set out the same evening, he had done so, packing everything but the dress shirt. The shirt worn since the morning was crumpled and out of the question with the fashionable open waistcoat. It was a long way to send to the Sherbatskoys. They sent out to buy a shirt. The servant came back. Everything was shut up. It was Sunday. They sent to Stepan Arkadyevitch and brought a shirt. It was impossibly wide and short. They sent finally to the Sherbatskoys to unpack the things. The bridegroom was expected at the church while he was pacing up and down his room like a wild beast in a cage, peeping out into the corridor, and with horror and despair recalling what absurd things he had said to Kitty and what she might be thinking now. At last, the guilty Kuzma flew panting into the room with the shirt. Only just in time. They were just lifting it into the van, said Kuzma. 3 minutes later, Levin ran full speed into the corridor, not looking at his watch for fear of aggravating his sufferings. You won't help matters like this, said Stepan Arkadyevitch with a smile, hurrying with more deliberation after him. It will come round. It will come round, I tell you. Short and sweet. End of chapter 3. Okay. Everybody's waiting. Everybody is waiting so patiently, and they're like, oh, it's fine. Like, they're just a little late. The bride and the bridegroom are just, a little late. It's fine. And then it just seems to be taking too much time. And so we get a little peek into the behind the scenes, and Kitty is ready. She's ready to go. She's just patiently waiting for Levin. And Levin is pacing back and forth in his room because he has everything that he needs, except his servant didn't lay out a fresh shirt because Levin was already wearing a shirt. Why would he need another shirt? But the shirt that Levin is wearing is now crumpled and is just out of fashion for the open waistcoat look that is popular now. So they've been on a mission to go and buy him a shirt, and everything is closed because it's Sunday. And so they're like, okay, well, let's go to this person's house. Okay, well, this doesn't fit. It's too short. It's too wide. Let's go over here. And so finally, Kuzma brings the shirt. Here we go. This whole chapter was just anticipation of waiting for this shirt. And also we do get more doubt and like going back and forth with Levin about being married to Kitty. Not so much that he doubts it, but still thinking that she doubts it and that she is going to go back on this. Interesting. Chapter 4. Oh, they've come. Here he is. Which one? Rather young. Why, my dear soul, she looks more dead than alive, were the comments in the crowd, when Levin, meeting his bride in the entrance, walked with her into the church. Stepan Arkadyevitch told his wife the cause of the delay, and the guests were whispering it with smiles to one another. Levin saw nothing and no one. He did not take his eyes off his bride. Everyone said she had lost her looks dreadfully of late, and was not nearly so pretty on her wedding day as usual. But Levin did not think so. He looked at her hair done up high, with the long white veil and white flowers, and the high, stand-up scalloped collar, that in such a maidenly fashion hid her long neck at the sides and only showed it in front, her strikingly slender figure. And it seemed to him that she looked better than ever, not because these flowers, this veil, this gown from Paris added anything to her beauty, but because, in spite of the elaborate sumptuousness of her attire, the expression of her sweet face, of her eyes, of her lips, was still more her own characteristic expression of guileless truthfulness. I was beginning to think you meant to run away, she said, and smiled at him. It's so stupid what happened to me. I'm ashamed to speak of it, he said, reddening. and he was obliged to turn to Sergei Ivanovich, who came up to him. "This is a pretty story of yours about the shirt," said Sergei Ivanovich, shaking his head and smiling. "Yes, yes," answered Levin, without an idea of what they were talking about. "Now, Kostya, you have to decide," said Stepan Arkadyevich with an air of mock dismay. "A weighty question. You are at this moment just in the humor to appreciate all its gravity. They ask me, are they to light the candles that have been lighted before, or candles that have never been lighted? It's a matter of 10 rubles, he said, relaxing his lips into a smile. I have decided, but I was afraid you might not agree. Levin saw it was a joke, but he could not smile. Well, how's it to be then? Unlighted or lighted candles? That's the question. Yes, unlighted. Oh, I'm very glad. The question's decided, said Stepan Arkadyevich, smiling. How silly men are, though, in this position, he said to Shirivkov, when Levin, after looking absently at him, had moved back to his bride. Kitty, mind you're the first to step on the carpet, said Countess Nordston, coming up. You're a nice person, she said to Levin. Aren't you frightened? Said Marya Dmitrievna, an old aunt. Are you cold? You're pale. Stop a minute. Stoop down, said Kitty's sister, Madame Lvovna, and with her plump, handsome arms she smilingly set straight the flowers on her head. Dolly came up, tried to say something, but could not speak, cried, and then laughed unnaturally. Kitty looked at all of them, with the same absent eyes as Levin. Meanwhile, the officiating clergy had got into their vestments, and the priest and deacon came out to the lectern, which stood in the forepart of the church. The priest turned to Levin, saying something. Levin did not hear what the priest said. Take the bride's hand and lead her up, the best man said to Levin. It was a long while before Levin could make out what was expected of him. For a long time they tried to set him right and made him begin again, because he kept taking Kitty by the wrong arm or with the wrong arm, till he understood at last that what he had to do was, without changing his position, to take her right hand in his right hand. When at last he had taken the bride's hand in the correct way, the priest walked a few paces in front of them and stopped at the lectern. The crowd of friends and relations moved after them, with a buzz of talk and a rustle of skirts. Someone stooped down and pulled out the bride's train. The church became so still that the drops of wax could be heard falling from the candles. The little old priest in his ecclesiastical cap, with his long, silvery gray locks of hair parted behind his ears, was fumbling with something at the lectern, putting out his little old hands from under the heavy silver vestment with the gold cross on the back of it. Stepan Arkadyevich approached him cautiously, whispered something, and, making a sign to Levin, walked back again. The priest lighted 2 candles, wreathed with flowers, and holding them sideways so that the wax dropped slowly from them, he turned, facing the bridal pair. The priest was the same old man that had confessed Levin. He looked with weary and melancholy eyes at the bride and bridegroom, sighed, and putting his right hand out from his vestment, blessed the bridegroom with it, and also with a shade of solicitous tenderness laid the crossed fingers on the bowed head of Kitty. Then he gave them the candles, and taking the censer, moved slowly away from them. Can it be true? Thought Levin, and he looked round at his bride. Looking down at her, he saw her face and profile, and from the scarcely perceptible quiver of her lips and eyelashes, he knew she was aware of his eyes upon her. She did not look round, but the high, scalloped collar that reached her little pink ear trembled faintly. He saw that a sigh was held back in her throat, and the little hand in the long glove shook as it held the candle. All the fuss of the shirt, of being late, all the talk of friends and relations, their annoyance, his ludicrous position, all suddenly passed away, and he was filled with joy and dread. The handsome, stately head deacon, wearing a silver robe and his curly locks standing out at each side of his head, stepped smartly forward, and lifting his stole on 2 fingers, stood opposite the priest. "Blessed be the name of the Lord," said the solemn syllables rang out slowly, one after another, setting the air quivering with waves of sound. "Blessed is the name of our God, from the beginning, is now, and ever shall be," the little old priest answered in a submissive, piping voice, still fingering something at the lectern. And the full chorus of the unseen choir rose up, filling the whole church, from the windows to the vaulted roof, with broad waves of melody. It grew stronger, rested for an instant, and slowly died away. They prayed, as they always do, for peace from on high and for salvation, for the Holy Synod and for the Tsar. They prayed, too, for the servants of God, Constantine and Ekaterina, now plighting their troth. "Vouchsafe to them love made perfect, peace and help, O Lord, we beseech thee," the whole church seemed to breathe with the voice of the head deacon. Levin heard the words, and they impressed him. How did they guess that it is help, just help, that one wants? He thought, recalling all his fears and doubts of late. What do I know? What can I do in this fearful business? He thought. Without help. Yes, it is help I want now. When the deacon had finished the prayer for the imperial family, the priest turned to the bridal pair with a book. "Eternal God, that joinest together in love them that their..." What? "Eternal God, that joinest together in love them that were separate," he read in a gentle, piping voice, "who hast ordained the union of holy wedlock that cannot be set asunder, thou who didst bless Isaac and Rebekah and their descendants, according to thy holy covenant. Bless thy servants, Constantine and Ekaterina, leading them in the path of all good works. For gracious and merciful art thou, our Lord, and glory be to thee, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, now and ever shall be. Amen," the unseen choir sent rolling again upon the air. "Joinest together in love them that were separate." What deep meaning in those words, and how they correspond with what one feels at this moment, thought Levin. Is she feeling the same as I? And looking round, he met her eyes, and from their expression he concluded that she was understanding it just as he was. But this was a mistake. She almost completely missed the meaning of the words of the service. She had not heard them, in fact. She could not listen to them and take them in. So strong was the one feeling that filled her and grew stronger and stronger. That feeling was joy at the completion of the process that for the last month and a half had been going on in her soul, and had during those 6 weeks been a joy and a torture to her. On the day when, in the drawing room of the house at Arbity Street, she had gone up to him in her brown dress and given herself to him without a word. On that day, at that hour, there took place in her heart a complete severance from all her old life, and a quite different, new, utterly strange life had begun for her, while the old life was actually going on as before. Those 6 weeks had for her been a time of the utmost bliss and the utmost misery. All her life, all her desires and hopes were concentrated on this one man, still uncomprehended by her, to whom she was bound by a feeling of alternate attraction and repulsion, even less comprehended than the man himself, and all the while she was going on living in the inward conditions of her old life. Living the old life, she was horrified at herself, at her utter insurmountable callousness to all her own past, to things, to habits, to the people she had loved, who loved her, to her mother, who was wounded by her indifference, to her kind, tender father, till then dearer than all the world. At one moment she was horrified at this indifference. At another she rejoiced at what had brought her to this indifference. She could not frame a thought, not a wish apart from life with this man. But this new life was not yet, and she could not even picture it clearly to herself. There was only anticipation, the dread and joy of the new and the unknown, and now behold, anticipation and uncertainty and remorse at the abandonment of the old life, all was ending, and the new was beginning. This new life could not but have terrors for her inexperience. But terrible or not, the change had been wrought 6 weeks before in her soul, and this was merely the final sanction of what had been long completed in her heart. Turning again to the lectern, the priest, with some difficulty, took Kitty's little ring, and asking Levin for his hand, put it on the first joint of his finger. This servant of God, Constantine, plights his troth to the servant of God, Karenina. And putting his big ring on Kitty's touchingly weak, pink little finger, the priest said the same thing. And the bridal pair tried several times to understand what they had to do, and each time it made some mistakes and were corrected by the priest in a whisper. At last, having duly performed the ceremony, having signed the rings with the cross, the priest handed Kitty the big ring and Levin the little one. Again they were puzzled, and passed the rings from one hand to hand, still without doing what was expected. Dolly, Chirikov, and Stepan Arkadyevitch stepped forward to set them right. There was an interval of hesitation, whispering, and smiles, but the expression of solemn emotion on the faces of the betrothed pair did not change. On the contrary, in their perplexity over their hands, they looked more grave and deeply moved than before, and the smile with which Stepan Arkadyevitch whispered to them that now they would each put on their own ring died away on his lips. He had a feeling that any smile would jar on them. Thou who didst from the beginning create man and male and female, the priest read from after the exchange of rings. From thee woman was given to man to be a helpmeet to him and for the procreation of children, O Lord our God, who hast poured down the blessings of thy truth according to thy holy covenant upon thy chosen servants, our fathers, from generation to generation, bless thy servants, Constantine and Ekaterina, and make their troth fast in faith and union of hearts and truth and love. Levin felt more and more that all his ideas of marriage, all his dreams of how he would order his life, were mere childishness, and that it was something he had not understood hitherto, and now understood less than ever, though it was being performed upon him. The lump in his throat rose higher and higher. Tears that would not be checked came into his eyes. End of chapter 4. All right. Levin and Kitty are married. Okay, this is why we have rehearsals, because neither of them really know what they're doing when they get up to the altar. Levin is supposed to be walking Kitty around, and he is grabbing her wrong arm with his wrong arm, and it takes them a minute to figure it out. And while all of this is going on, both Kitty and Levin are in their own heads, and they're both just not really knowing what the future is, and their ideas of marriage and the reality of marriage being different but somewhat the same. It's interesting. And I feel like this could have been a conversation or multiple conversations before they were married. Like, hey, like, what are you looking for in a marriage partner or something? But we don't do that. We don't do that here. No. Get married, then ask all of the questions. So we'll see. And Kitty has also talked about how, like her old life, she is like separating her old life from her current life and her future life. But if you've read any Faulkner, there's no way to do that. I mean, if you've read a lot of people, there's no way to do that. A lot of authors talk about that, how your past has shaped who you are, and the decisions you have made are based on your experiences of your past, and the past is never, is never dead, it's never really past. And I just think that this marriage is already on unstable foundation. We'll see. And it's not like it's an arranged marriage at all. This is a love marriage. And I feel like they just didn't get to know each other. They knew each other, when they were younger, but a lot of things have happened. Now they're like adults. And I think just like the fact that he proposed once and she said no is a thing that's gonna come back. I don't know. But now they're officially married in the church, and everybody has witnessed this. We shall see. Chapter 5. In the church there was all Moscow, all the friends and relations, and during the ceremony of plighting troth in the brilliantly lighted church, there was an incessant flow of discreetly subdued talk in the circles of gaily dressed women and girls, and men in white ties, frock coats, and uniforms. The talk was principally kept up by the men, while the women were absorbed in watching every detail of the ceremony, which always means so much to them. In the little group nearest to the bride were her two sisters, Dolly, and the other one, the self-possessed beauty, Madame Lvova, who had just arrived from abroad. "Why is it Marie's in lilac, as bad as black at a wedding?" said Madame Korsunskaya. "With her complexion, it's the one salvation," responded Madame Trubetskaya. "I wonder why they had the wedding in the evening. It's like shop people. So much prettier. I was married in the evening, too," answered Madame Korsunskaya, and she sighed, remembering how charming she had been that day, and how absurdly in love her husband was, and how different it all was now. "They say if anyone's best man more than 10 times, he'll never be married. I wanted to be for the 10th time, but the post was taken," said Count Siniavin to the Princess Tverskaya, who had designs on him. Princess Tverskaya only answered with a smile. She looked at Kitty, thinking how and when she would stand with Count Siniavin in Kitty's place, and how she would remind him then of his joke today. Sherbatskoy told the old maid of honor, Madame Nikolaeva, that he meant to put the crown on Kitty's chignon for luck. She ought not To have worn a chignon, answered Madame Nikolaeva, who had long ago made up her mind that if the elderly widower she was angling for married her, the wedding should be of the simplest. I don't like such grandeur. Sergei Ivanovich was talking to Darya Dmitrievna, jestingly assuring her that the custom of going away after the wedding was becoming common, because newly married people always felt a little ashamed of themselves. Your brother may feel proud of himself. She's a marvel of sweetness. I believe you're envious. Oh, I've got over that, Darya Dmitrievna, he answered, and a melancholy and serious expression suddenly came over his face. Stepan Arkadyevitch was telling his sister-in-law his joke about the divorce. The wreath wants setting straight, she answered, not hearing him. What a pity she's lost her looks so, Countess Nordston said to Madame Lvova. She's still not worth her little finger, is he? Oh, I like him so, not because he's my future beau-frère, answered Madame Lvova. And how well he's behaving. He's so difficult, too, to look well in such a position, not to be ridiculous. And he's not ridiculous and not affected. One can see he's moved. You expected it, I suppose. Almost. She always cared for him. Well, we shall see which of them will step on the rug first. I warned Kitty. It will make no difference, said Madame Lvova. We're all obedient wives. It's in our family. Oh, I stepped on the rug before Vasily, I propose. On purpose. Oh, I stepped on the rug before Vasily on purpose. And you, Dolly? Dolly stood beside them. She heard them, but she did not answer. She was deeply moved. The tears stood in her eyes, and she could not have spoken without crying. She was rejoicing over Kitty and Levin, going back in thought to her own wedding. She glanced at the radiant figure of Stepan Arkadyevitch, forgot all the present, and remembered only her own innocent love. She recalled not herself only, but all her woman friends and acquaintances. She thought of them on the one day of her triumph, when they had stood like Kitty under the wedding crown, with love and hope and dread in their hearts, renouncing the past and stepping forward into the mysterious future. Among the brides that came back to her memory, she thought, too, of her darling Anna, of whose proposed divorce she had just been hearing. And she had stood just as innocent in orange flowers and bridal veil. And now, it's terribly strange, she said to herself. It was not merely the sisters, the women friends and female relations of the bride who were following every detail of the ceremony. Women who were quite strangers, mere spectators, were watching it excitedly, holding their breath in fear of losing a single movement or expression of the bride and bridegroom, and angrily not answering, often not hearing, the remarks of the callous men who kept making joking or irrelevant observations. Why has she been crying? Is she being married against her will? Against her will to a fine fellow like that. A prince, isn't he? Is that her sister in the white satin? Just listen how the deacon booms out, and fearing her husband. Are the choristers from Chidovo? No, from the synod. I asked the footman. He says he's going to take her home to his country place at once. Awfully rich, they say. That's why she's being married to him. No, they're a well-matched pair. I say, Maria Vasilievna, you were making out those flyaway crinolines were not being worn. Just look at her in that puce dress. An ambassador's wife, they say she is, how her skirt bounces out from side to side. What a pretty dear the bride is. Like a lamb decked with flowers. Well, say what you will, we women feel for our sister. Such were the comments in the crowd of gazing women who had succeeded in slipping in at the church doors. A short one, a little shorty. End of chapter 5. Chapter 5, we are just kind of getting a chorus of the people who have or who are attending the wedding, and everything from what Kitty looks like to reimaginings or remembrances of their own wedding, and just joy and, I hope who's going to step on the rug first, like these types of observances. And they are commenting on Kitty's looks, which is interesting. We got this in a couple chapters now about how Kitty doesn't look as beautiful or even as happy. There's a comment about, does it look like she's crying? Or has she been crying? Is she being married against her will? No, she's marrying a prince. Like, all of these different comments, all of these different, like, rumor observances. Just a fluff and contextual and societal chapter. Just for funsies. All right. Chapter 6. When the ceremony of plighting troth was over, the beadle spread before the lectern in the middle of the church a piece of pink silken stuff. The choir sang a complicated and elaborate psalm, in which the bass and tenor rang responses to one another, and the priest, turning round, pointed the bridal pair to the pink silk rug. Though both had often heard a great deal about the saying that the one who first steps on the rug will be the head of the house, neither Levin nor Kitty were capable of recollecting it as they took the steps forward. They did not hear the loud remarks and disputes that followed, some maintaining he had stepped on first, and others that both had stepped on together. After the customary questions, whether they desired to enter upon matrimony, and whether they were pledged to anyone else, and their answers, which sounded strange to themselves, a new ceremony began. Kitty listened to the words of the prayer, trying to make out their meaning, but she could not. The feeling of triumph and radiant happiness flooded her soul more and more as the ceremony went on and deprived her of all power of attention. They prayed, "Endow them with continence and fruitfulness, and vouchsafe that their hearts may rejoice, looking upon their sons and daughters." They alluded to God's creation of a wife from Adam's rib, "And for this cause a man shall leave father and mother, and cleave unto his wife, and they two shall be one flesh," and that this is a great mystery. They prayed that God would make them fruitful and bless them, like Isaac and Rebekah, Joseph, Moses, and Zipporah, and that they might look upon their children's children. "That's all splendid," thought Kitty, catching the words. "All that's just as it should be." And a smile of happiness, unconsciously reflected in everyone who looked at her, beamed on her radiant face. "Put it on quite," voices were heard, urging when the priest had put on the wedding crowns and sherbatskoy. His hands, shaking in its 3-button glove, held the crown high above her head. "Put it on," she whispered, smiling. Levin looked round at her and was struck by the joyful radiance of her face, and unconsciously her feeling infected him too. He, too, like her, felt glad and happy. They enjoyed hearing the epistle read, and the roll of the head deacon's voice at the last verse, awaited with such impatience by the outside public. They enjoyed drinking out of the shallow cup of warm red wine and water, and they were still more pleased when the priest, flinging back his stole and taking both their hands in his, led them round the lectern to the accompaniment of bass voices chanting, "Glory to God." Sherbatskoy and Chirikov supporting the crowns and stumbling over the bride's train, smiling too and seeming delighted at something, were at one moment left behind, at the next treading on the bridal pair as the priest came to a halt. The spark of joy kindled in Kitty seemed to have infected everyone in the church. It seemed to Levin that the priest and the deacon too wanted to smile just as he did. Taking the crowns off their heads, the priest read the last prayer and congratulated the young people. Levin looked at Kitty, and he had never before seen her as she did. Seen her look as she did. She was charming with the new radiance of happiness in her face. Levin longed to say something to her, but he did not know whether it was all over. The priest got him out of his difficulty. He smiled his kindly smile and said gently, "Kiss your wife, and kiss your hand, your husband," and took out the candles of their hands. Levin kissed her smiling lips with timid care, gave her his arm, and with a new strange sense of closeness, walked out of the church. He did not believe, he could not believe, that it was all true. It was only when their wondering and timid eyes met that he believed in it, because he felt that they were one. After supper, the same night, the young people left for the country. End of chapter 6. Okay, I keep thinking that they're married. I'm like, all right, they're married. Okay, they're married. Yep, they're married. Okay, now they are married. Now they are married. Okay, and they stepped on the rug, which apparently means that whoever steps on it first is going to be the head of the household. And neither one of them were really paying attention, and they both kind of stepped on it, and people are like, this person stepped on it, this person stepped on it, they stepped on it at the same time. And so there's just so much ceremony, and Kitty has a moment where she is in and out of what the prayers are and what the priest is saying, but she hears, the possibility of looking at their children and their children's children, and that brings her joy and that makes her smile. And so all of the unease and doubt and maybe defensiveness that the crowd was feeling, they now are picking up on Kitty's ease and joy and radiance and brilliance, which is so interesting. Like, animals and children and I guess crowds are just so attuned to how people are feeling and the vibe and things like this. And I just think that that's great. I just think that that's great. So now they're married, officially married, and the same day they are just whisked off to the country. And the chapter before, it was said that wives or brides and bridegrooms leave the same day to escape the embarrassment of their wedding, and I think that's hilarious. Chapter 7. We're changing characters. Let's go. Now that they've been whisked away into the country, it's like, okay, let's give them some space. Vronsky and Anna had been traveling for 3 months together in Europe. They had visited Venice, Rome, and Naples, and had just arrived at a small Italian town where they meant to stay some time. A handsome headwaiter with thick pomaded hair parted from the neck upwards, an evening coat, a broad white cambric shirt front, and a bunch of trinkets hanging above his rounded stomach, stood with his hands in the full curve of his pockets, looking contemptuously from under his eyelids, while he gave some frigid reply to a gentleman who had stopped him. Catching the sound of footsteps coming from the other side of the entry towards the staircase, the head waiter turned round, and seeing the Russian count who had taken their best rooms, He took his hands out of his pockets deferentially, and with a bow informed him that a courier had been, and that the business about the palazzo had been arranged. The steward was prepared to sign the agreement. "Ah, I'm glad to hear it," said Vronsky. "Is Madame at home or not?"
"Madame has been out for a walk, but has returned now," answered the waiter.
Vronsky took off his soft, white-brimmed hat and passed his handkerchief over his heated brow and hair, which had grown half over his ears, and was brushed back, covering the bald patch on his head. And glancing casually at the gentleman, who still stood there gazing intently at him, he would have gone.
"This gentleman is a Russian who was inquiring after you," said the head waiter.
With mingled feelings of annoyance at never being able to get away from acquaintances anywhere, and longing to find some sort of diversion from the monotony of his life, Vronsky looked once more at the gentleman, who had retreated and stood still again, and at the same moment a light came into the eyes of both. "Golenishev! Vronsky!" It really was Golenishev, a comrade of Vronsky's in the Corps of Pages. In the Corps, Golenishev had belonged to the Liberal Party. He left the Corps without entering the army, and had never taken office under the government. Vronsky and he had gone completely different ways on leaving the Corps, and had only met once since. At that meeting, Vronsky perceived that Golenishev had taken up a sort of lofty, intellectually liberal line, and was consequently disposed to look down upon Vronsky's interests and calling in life. Hence, Vronsky had met him with the chilling and haughty manner he so well knew how to assume, the meaning of which was, "You may like or dislike my way of life. That's a matter of the most perfect indifference to me. You will have to treat me with respect if you want to know me." Golenishev had been contemptuously indifferent to the tone taken by Vronsky. This second meeting might have been expected, one would have supposed, to estrange them still more. But now they beamed and exclaimed with delight on recognizing one another. Vronsky would never have expected to be so pleased to see Golenishev, but probably he was not himself aware how bored he was. He forgot the disagreeable impression of their last meeting, and with a face of frank delight held out his hand to his old comrade. The same expression of delight replaced the look of uneasiness on Golenishev's face. "How glad I am to meet you," said Vronsky, showing his strong white teeth in a friendly smile. "I heard the name Vronsky, but I didn't know which one. I'm very, very glad." "Let's go in. Come, tell me what you're doing." "I've been living here for 2 years. I'm working." "Ah," said Vronsky with sympathy. "Let's go in." And with the habit common with Russians, instead of saying in Russian what he wanted to keep from the servants, he began to speak in French. "Do you know Madame Karenina? We are traveling together. I am going to see her now," he said in French, carefully scrutinizing Golenishev's face. "Ah, I did not know," though he did know. Golenishev answered carelessly. "Have you been here long?" he added. 4 days, Vronsky answered, once more scrutinizing his friend's face intently. "Yes, he's a decent fellow, and will look at the thing properly," Vronsky said to himself, catching the significance of Golenishev's face and the change of subject. "I can introduce him to Anna. He looks at it properly." During those 3 months that Vronsky had spent abroad with Anna, he had always, on meeting new people, asked himself how the new person would look at his relations with Anna, and for the most part, in men, he had met with the proper way of looking at it. But if he had been asked, and those who looked at it properly had been asked, Exactly how they did look at it, both he and they would have been greatly puzzled to answer. In reality, those who, in Vronsky's opinion, had the proper view had no sort of view at all, but behaved in general as well-bred persons do behave in regard to all the complex and insoluble problems with which life is encompassed on all sides. They behaved with propriety, avoiding allusions and unpleasant questions. They assumed an air of fully comprehending the import and force of the situation, of accepting and even approving of it, but of considering it superfluous and uncalled for to put all this into words. Vronsky at once divined that Golenishev was of this class, and therefore was doubly pleased to see him, and, in fact, Golenishev's manner to Madame Karenina, when he was taken to call on her, was all that Vronsky could have desired. Obviously, without the slightest effort, he steered clear of all subjects which might lead to embarrassment. He had never met Anna before, and was struck by her beauty, and still more by the frankness with which she accepted her position. She blushed when Vronsky brought in Golenishev, and he was extremely charmed by this childish blush overspreading her candid and handsome face. But what he liked particularly was the way in which, at once, as though on purpose that there might be no misunderstanding with an outsider, she called Vronsky simply Alexei, and said they were moving into a house they had just taken, what was here called a palazzo. Golenishev liked this direct and simple attitude to her own position. Looking at Anna's manner of simple-hearted, spirited gaiety, and knowing Alexei Alexandrovitch and Vronsky, Golenishev fancied that he understood her perfectly. He fancied that he understood what she was utterly unable to understand, how it was that, having made her husband wretched, having abandoned him and her son, and lost her good name, she yet felt full of spirits, gaiety, and happiness. It's in the guidebook, said Golenishev, referring to the palazzo Vronsky had taken. There's a first-rate Tintoretto there, one of his latest period. I'll tell you what. It's a lovely day. Let's go and have another look at it, said Vronsky, addressing Anna. I shall be very glad to. I'll go and put on my hat. Would you say it's hot? She said, stopping short in the doorway and looking inquiringly at Vronsky, and again a vivid flush overspread her face. Vronsky saw that her eyes, that she did not know on what terms he cared to be with Golenishev, and so was afraid of not behaving as he would wish. He looked a long, tender look at her. No, not very. And it seemed to her that she understood everything, most of all, that he was pleased with her, and smiling to him, she walked with her rapid step out the door. The friends glanced at one another, and a look of hesitation came into both faces, as though Golenishev, unmistakably admiring her, would have liked to say something about her, and could not find the right thing to say, while Vronsky desired and dreaded his doing so. Well then, Vronsky began to start a conversation of some sort. So you're settled here. You're still at the same work then? He went on, recalling that he had been told Golenishev was writing something. Yes, I'm writing the second part of the 2 elements, said Golenishev, coloring with pleasure at the question. That is, to be exact, I am not writing it yet. I am preparing, collecting materials. It will be of far wider scope and will touch on almost all questions. We in Russia refuse to see that we are the heirs of Byzantium, 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 said he, launching into a long and heated explanation of his views. Vronsky at the first moment felt embarrassed at not even knowing of the first part of the two elements, of which the author spoke as something well known. But as Golenishev began to lay down his opinions and Vronsky was able to follow them even without knowing the two elements, he listened to him with some interest, for Golenishev spoke well, but Vronsky was startled and annoyed by the nervous irascibility with which Golenishev talked of the subject that engrossed him. As he went on talking, his eyes glittered more and more angrily. He was more and more hurried in his replies to imaginary opponents, and his face grew more and more excited and worried. Remembering Golenishev, a thin, lively, good-natured, and well-bred boy, always at the head of the class, Vronsky could not make out the reason of his irritability, and he did not like it. What he particularly disliked was that Golenishev, a man belonging to a good set, should put himself on a level with some scribbling fellows, with whom he was irritated and angry. Was it worth it? Vronsky disliked it, yet he felt that Golenishev was unhappy, and was sorry for him. Unhappiness, almost mental derangement, was visible on his mobile, rather handsome face, while, without even noticing Anna's coming in, he went on hurriedly and hotly expressing his views. When Anna came in her hat and cape, and her lovely hand rapidly swinging her parasol, and stood beside him, it was with a feeling of relief that Vronsky broke away from the plaintive eyes of Golenishev, which fastened persistently upon him, and with a fresh rush of love looked at his charming companion, full of life and happiness. Golenishev recovered himself with an effort, and at first was dejected and gloomy. But Anna, disposed to feel friendly with everyone as she was at that time, soon revived his spirits by her direct and lively manner. After trying various subjects of conversation, she got him upon painting, of which he talked very well, and she listened to him attentively. They walked to the house they had taken and looked over it. "I am very glad of one thing," said Anna to Golenishev when they were on their way back. "Alexei will have a capital atelier. You must certainly take that room," she said to Vronsky in Russian, using the affectionately familiar form as though she saw that Golenishev would become intimate with them in their isolation, and that there was no need of reserve before him. "Do you paint?" said Golenishev, turning round quickly to Vronsky. "Yes, I used to study long ago, and now I have begun to do a little," said Vronsky, reddening. "He has great talent," said Anna with a delighted smile. "I'm no judge, of course, but good judges have said the same." End of chapter 7. All right, so we have left Kitty and Levin to go be married and to fling themselves into the country. I am positive we will go back to the relationship to see how they're doing. But chapter 7 brings us back to Anna and Levin, and it has now been 3 months that they have been traveling around Europe together. And she is just still married to Alexei, but traveling around with Vronsky. And so everybody knows, but not everybody knows. You know, if you know, you know. If you don't, you probably know. But you probably have suspicions, but aren't going to bring it up because that is not polite society. But they are traveling around and they are just super, super happy, have been hopping around in different countries and just really enjoying themselves. And while hopping around, Vronsky meets an acquaintance, Goleneshev, and they have met, and there is an understanding between them. Goleneshev is like, I haven't heard of Anna, and we get the aside like, oh, he's definitely heard of Anna. He's definitely heard of Vronsky and Anna, so he knows, but he's being polite about it, and they're giving sort of like the nudge to each other, like, are you cool? You good? Can we trust you with this knowledge of us? And Golenechev is like giving the cool vibes. So they're able to kind of be themselves and relax a little bit. And that's, yeah. So now they're just walking around, and yeah, it's nice to come back to Anna and Vronsky. I feel like, I mean, Anna is our main characters. We have 12 main characters. We're very busy to see what everybody is doing, but I do enjoy the drama surrounding Anna and Alexei and Vronsky. Like, they're my favorite. They're my favorite drama, so I like that we've come back to them. Chapter 8. Anna, in that first period of her emancipation and rapid return to health, felt herself unpardonably happy and full of the joy of life. The thought of her husband's unhappiness did not poison her happiness. On one side, that memory was too awful to be thought of. On the other side, her husband's unhappiness had given her too much happiness to be regretted. The memory of all that had happened after her illness, her reconciliation with her husband, its breakdown, the news of Vronsky's wound, his visit, the preparations for divorce, the departure from her husband's house, the parting from her son, all that seemed to her like a delirious dream from which she had waked up alone with Vronsky abroad. The thought of the harm caused to her husband roused in her a feeling like repulsion, and akin to what a drowning man might feel who has shaken off another man clinging to him. That man did drown. It was an evil action, of course, but it was the sole means of escape, and better not to brood over these fearful facts. One consolatory reflection upon her conduct had occurred to her at the first moment of the final rupture, and when now she recalled all the past, she remembered that one reflection. I have inevitably made that man wretched, she thought. But I don't want to profit by his misery. I too am suffering, and shall suffer. I am losing what I prized above everything. I am losing my good name and my son. I've done wrong, and so I don't want happiness. I don't want a divorce, and shall suffer from my shame and the separation from my child. But however sincerely Anna had meant to suffer, she was not suffering. Shame there was not. With the tact of which both had such a large share, they had succeeded in avoiding Russian ladies abroad, and so had never placed themselves in a false position. And everywhere they had met people who pretended that they perfectly understood their position, far better, indeed, than they did themselves. Separation from the son she loved, even that did not cause her anguish in these early days. The baby girl, his child, was so sweet, and had so won Anna's heart, since she was all that was left her, that Anna rarely thought of her son. The desire for life, waxing stronger with recovered health, was so intense, and the conditions of life were so new and pleasant, that Anna felt unpardonably happy. The more she got to know Vronsky, the more she loved him. She loved him for himself, and for his love for her. Her complete ownership of him was a continual joy to her. His presence was always sweet to her. All the traits of his character, which she learned to know better and better, were unutterably dear to her. His appearance, changed by his civilian dress, was as fascinating to her as though she were some young girl in love. In everything he said, thought, and did, she was something particularly noble and elated and elevated. His adoration, her adoration of him, alarmed her, indeed. She sought and could not find in him anything not fine. She dared not show him her sense of her own insignificance beside him. It seemed to her that, knowing this, he might sooner cease to love her, and she dreaded nothing now so much as losing his love, though she had no grounds for fearing it. She could not help being grateful to him for his attitude to her, and showing that she appreciated it. He, who had, in her opinion, such a marked aptitude for a political career, in which he would have been certain to play a leading part. He had sacrificed his ambition for her sake, and never betrayed the slightest regret. He was more lovingly respectful to her than ever, and the constant care that she should not feel the awkwardness of her position never deserted him for a single instant. He, so manly a man, never opposed her, had indeed, with her, no will of his own, and was anxious, it seemed, for nothing but to anticipate her wishes. And she could not but appreciate this, even though the very intensity of his solicitude for her, the atmosphere of care with which he surrounded her, sometimes weighed upon her. Vronsky, meanwhile, in spite of the complete realization of what he had so long desired, was not perfectly happy. He soon felt that the realization of his desires gave him no more than a grain of sand out of the mountain of happiness he had expected. It showed him the mistake men make in picturing to themselves happiness as the realization of their desires. For a time after joining his life to hers and putting on civilian dress, he had felt all the delight of freedom in general, of which he had known nothing before, and of freedom in his love, and he was content. But not for long. He was soon aware that there was springing up in his heart a desire for desires, ennui. Without conscious intention, he began to clutch at every passing caprice, taking it for a desire and an object. 16 hours of the day must be occupied in some way, since they were living abroad in complete freedom, outside the conditions of social life which filled up time in Petersburg. As for the amusement of bachelor existence, which had provided Vronsky with entertainment on previous tours abroad, they could not be thought of, since the sole attempt of the sort had led to a sudden attack of depression in Anna, quite out of proportion with the cause, a late supper with bachelor friends. Relations with the society of the place, foreign and Russian, were equally out of the question owing to the irregularity of their position. The inspection of objects of interest, apart from the fact that everything had been seen already, had not for Vronsky, a Russian and a sensible man, the immense significance Englishmen are able to attach to that pursuit. And just as the hungry stomach eagerly accepts every object it can get, hoping to find nourishment in it, Vronsky quite unconsciously clutched first at politics, then at new books, and then at pictures. As he had from a child a taste for painting, and as, not knowing what to spend his money on, he had begun collecting engravings, he came to a stop at painting, began to take interest in it, and concentrated upon it the unoccupied mass of desires which demanded satisfaction. He had a ready appreciation of art, and probably, with a taste for imitating art, he supposed himself to have the real thing essential for an artist. And after hesitating for some time which style of painting to select, religious, historical, realistic, or genre painting, he set to work to paint. He appreciated all kinds, and could have felt inspired by any one of them, but he had no conception of the possibility of knowing nothing at all of any school of painting, and of being inspired directly by what is within the soul, without caring whether what is painted will belong to any recognized school. Since he knew nothing of this, and drew his inspiration not directly from life, but indirectly from life embodied in art, his inspiration came very quickly and easily, and as quickly and easily came his success in painting something very similar to the sort of painting he was trying to imitate. More than any other style, he liked the French, graceful and effective, and in that style he began to paint Anna's portrait in Italian costume, and the portrait seemed to him, and to everyone who saw it, extremely successful. End of chapter 8. Okay, so we have Anna and Vronsky, and both kind of like what they're doing and what this trip kind of is meaning and doing for them. So Anna, at the very beginning, has listed all of the things that she is leaving behind, all of the realities of her life back at home. And so, of course, she's enjoying this, right? She has no responsibility. She has her daughter, which makes her not think about her son at all back at home. She has Vronsky, which makes her happy and not thinking about her husband at all. But also, from Vronsky and a little bit from Anna's perspective, it has come to a point where if Vronsky is not constantly with Anna, she feels like she's losing him. And so she's tightening the grip that she is trying to have on Vronsky and being... I'm trying to think of a word that just perfectly fits. Not overbearing, not like overly clingy, needy, I guess. But she is just wanting to be wanted so much. And she had that in Vronsky when they were back home. And now maybe the luster isn't so great, the shine isn't so brilliant. And Vronsky is also feeling that. And has even said like he went out late for dinner one night and came home and Anna like didn't super enjoy that. And so now he's like picking up painting and trying to do other things, and Anna isn't looking and feeling quite so wonderful. Now that the forbidden fruit isn't so much forbidden but is in like the palm of each of their hands, it's like, oh, maybe I don't really, this isn't what I thought it was gonna be. Things have changed. Now the fantastical, the what if situation is a reality. And so like coming to that. And yeah, with the discussion of Anna like feeling like she should be feeling sad or feeling guilty or feeling all of these things and not feeling that. Like that's a different kind of guilt of not feeling that way. She's dependent on his love. Yes, exactly. And when she feels that it's like not fully 125% there, she gets a little panicky. Yeah. Chapter 9. The old, neglected palazzo, with its lofty carved ceilings and frescoes on the walls, with its floors of mosaic, with its heavy yellow stuff curtains on the windows and its vases on pedestals and its open fireplaces, its carved doors and gloomy reception rooms, hung with pictures. This palazzo did much, by its very appearance after they had moved into it, to confirm in Vronsky the agreeable illusion that he was not so much a Russian country gentleman, a retired army officer, as an enlightened amateur and patron of the arts, himself a modest artist who had renounced the world, his connections, and his ambition for the sake of the woman he loved. The pose chosen by Vronsky with their removal into the palazzo was completely successful, and having, through Golenichev made acquaintance with a few interesting people, for a time he was satisfied. He painted studies from nature under the guidance of an Italian professor of painting and studied medieval Italian life. Medieval Italian life so fascinated Vronsky that he even wore a hat and flung a cloak over his shoulder in the medieval style, which, indeed, was extremely becoming to him. "Here we live, and know nothing of what's going on," Vronsky said to Golenishev, there we go, as he came to see him one morning. "Have you seen Mikhailov's picture?" he said, handing him a Russian gazette he had received that morning and pointing to an article on a Russian artist living in this very same town and just finishing a picture which had long been talked about and had been brought beforehand. The article reproached the government and the academy for letting so remarkable an artist be left without encouragement and support. "I've seen it," answered Golenishev. "Of course, he's not without talent, but it's all in a wrong direction. It's all the Ivanov Strauss Renan attitude to Christ and to religious painting." "What is the subject of the picture?" asked Anna. "Christ before Pilate. Christ is represented as a Jew with all the realism of the new school." And the question of the subject of the picture having brought him to one of his favorite theories, Golenishev launched forth into a disquisition on it. "I can't understand how they can fall into such a gross mistake. Christ always has his definite embodiment in the art of the great masters, and therefore, if they want to depict not God but a revolutionist or a sage, let them take from history a Socrates, a Franklin, a Charlotte Corday, but not Christ. They take the very figure which cannot be taken for their art, and then... And is it true that this Mikhailov is in such poverty?" asked Vronsky, thinking that, as a Russian Maecenas, it was his duty to assist the artist regardless of whether the picture was good or bad. "I should say not. He's a remarkable portrait painter. Have you ever seen his portrait of Madame Vasilichekova? But I believe he doesn't care about painting any more portraits, and so very likely he is in want. I maintain that couldn't we ask him to paint a portrait of Anna Arkadyevna?" asked Vronsky. "Why mine?" said Anna. "After yours, I don't want another portrait. Better have one of Annie." So she called her baby girl. "Here she is," she added, looking out of the window at the handsome Italian nurse who was carrying the child out into the garden, and immediately glancing unnoticed at Vronsky. The handsome nurse, from whom Vronsky was painting a head for his picture, was the one hidden grief in Anna's life. He painted with her as his model, admired her beauty and medievalism. My gosh. He painted with her as his model, admired her beauty and medievalism, and Anna dared not confess to herself that she was afraid of becoming jealous of this nurse, and was for that reason particularly gracious and condescending both to her and her little son. Vronsky, too, glanced out of the window and into Anna's eyes, and turning at once to Golenishev, he said, "Do you know this Mikhailov? I have met him, but he's an odd fish and quite without breeding. You know, one of those uncouth new people one's so often coming across nowadays. One of those free thinkers, who are reared d'emblée in theories of atheism, skepticism, and materialism in former days, said Golenischev, not observing or not willing to observe that both Anna and Vronsky wanted to speak. In former days, the free thinker was a man who had been brought up in ideas of religion, law, and morality, and only through conflict and struggle came to free thought. But now there has sprung up a new type of born free thinkers who grow up without even having heard of principles of morality or of religion, of the existence of authorities, who grow up directly in ideas of negation in everything, that is to say, savages. Well, he's of that class. He's the son, it appears, of some Moscow butler, and has never had any sort of bringing up. When he got into the academy and made his reputation, he tried, as he's no fool, to educate himself. And he turned to what seemed to him the very source of culture, the magazines. In old times, you see, a man who wanted to educate himself, a Frenchman, for instance, would have set to work to study all the classics and theologians and tragedians and historians and philosophers and, all the intellectual work that came in his way. In our day, he goes straight for the literature of negation, very quickly assimilates all the extracts of the science of negation, and he's ready. And that's not all. 20 years ago, he would have found in that literature traces of conflict with authorities, with the creeds of the ages. He would have perceived from this conflict that there was something else. But now he comes at once upon a literature in which the old creeds do not even furnish matter for discussion, but it is stated baldly that there is nothing else: evolution, natural selection, struggle for existence, and that's all. In my article, I tell you what, said Anna, who had for a long time been exchanging wary glances with Vronsky, and knew that he was not in the least interested in the education of this artist, but was simply absorbed by the idea of assisting him and ordering a portrait of him. I tell you what, she said, resolutely interrupting Golenischev, who was still talking away. Let's go and see him. Golenischev recovered his self-possession and readily agreed. But as the artist lived in a remote suburb, it was decided to take the carriage. An hour later, Anna, with Golenischev by her side and Vronsky on the front seat of the carriage facing them, drove up to a new ugly house in the remote suburb. On learning from the porter's wife, who came out to them, what Mikhailov saw visitors at his studio, but that at that moment he was in his lodging only a couple of steps away, they sent her to him with their cards, asking permission to see his pictures. End of chapter 9. Okay, chapter 9, we have still Golenischev, Anna, and Vronsky, and they are talking about art. Specifically, Golenischev is talking about the history and his bringing up of this one artist, Mikhailov, and Vronsky is not interested in any of this. He just wants to see portraits that Mikhailov has done, and he kind of wants Mikhailov to do a portrait of Anna. And Anna is like, oh no, you don't need to do that. but I'm pretty sure that Vronsky is just going to have this done. There is a mention that Vronsky had wanted to do portraits of the nurse that they have who is taking care of baby Anna, and adult Anna doesn't like that. She is stricken by the jealousy bug, and so because she is jealous, she every once in a while will be condescending to the nurse and to the nurse's kid. Like, come on, Anna, let's be a girl's girl. Why you gotta be like that? I hate that. So, yeah, so now they are on this, not quest, but they're on this quest to go see Mikhailov and talk with him and get some pictures. And Vronsky kind of wants to assist him in his work. Interesting. Interesting, interesting. Chapter 10. The artist Mikhailov was, as always, at work when the cards of Count Vronsky and Golenisov were brought to him. In the morning, he had been working in his studio at his big picture. On getting home, he flew into a rage with his wife for not having managed to put off the landlady who had been asking for money. I've said it to you 20 times. Don't enter into details. You're fool enough at all times, and when you start explaining things in Italian, you're a fool 3 times as foolish, he said, after a long dispute. Don't let it run so long. It's not my fault. If I had the money, leave me in peace, for God's sake, Mihailov shrieked, with tears in his voice, and stopping his ears, he went off into his working room, the other side of a partition wall, and closed the door after him. Idiotic woman, he said to himself, sat down to the table, and opening a portfolio, he set to work at once with peculiar fervor at a sketch he had begun. Never did he work with such fervor and success as when things went ill with him, and especially when he quarreled with his wife. Oh, damn them all, he thought, as he went on working. He was making a sketch for the figure of a man in a violent rage. A sketch had been made before, but he was dissatisfied with it. No, that one was better. Where is it? He went back to his wife and, scowling and not looking at her, asked his eldest little girl where was that piece of paper he had given them. The paper with the discarded sketch on it was found, but it was dirty and spotted with candle grease. Still, he took the sketch, laid it on the table, and, moving a little away, screwing up his eyes, he fell to gazing at it. All at once he smiled and gesticulated gleefully. That's it! That's it! He said, and at once, picking up the pencil, he began rapidly drawing. The spot of tallow had given the man a new pose. He had sketched this new pose when all at once he recalled the face of a shopkeeper of whom he had bought cigars. A vigorous face with a prominent chin, and he sketched this very face, this chin, on to the figure of the man. He laughed aloud with delight. The figure from a lifeless, imagined thing had become living, and such that it could never be changed. That figure lived and was clearly and unmistakably defined. The sketch might be corrected in accordance with the requirements of the figure. The legs, indeed, could and must be put differently, and the position of the left hand must be quite altered. The hair, too, might be thrown back. But in making these corrections, he was not altering the figure, but simply getting rid of what concealed the figure. He was, as it were, stripping off the wrappings which hindered it from being distinctly seen. Each new feature only brought out the whole figure in all its force and vigor, as it had suddenly come to him from the spot of tallow. He was carefully finishing the figure when the cards were brought him. "Coming! Coming!" He went in to his wife. "Come, Sasha, don't be cross," he said, smiling timidly and affectionately at her. "You were to blame. I was to blame. I'll make it all right."
and having made peace with his wife, he put on an olive green overcoat with a velvet collar and a hat, and went towards his studio. The successful figure he had already forgotten. Now he was delighted and excited at the visit of these people of consequence, Russians, who had come in their carriage. Of his picture, the one that stood now on his easel, he had at the bottom of his heart one conviction, that no one had ever painted a picture like it. He did not believe that his picture was better than all the pictures of Raphael, but he knew that what he tried to convey in that picture, no one ever had conveyed. This he knew positively, and had known a long while, ever since he had begun to paint it. But other people's criticisms, whatever they might be, had yet immense consequence in his eyes, and they agitated him to the depths of his very soul. Any remark, the most insignificant, that showed that the critic saw even the tiniest part of what he saw in the picture, agitated him to the depths of his soul. He always attributed to his critics a more profound comprehension than he had himself, and always expected from them something he did not himself see in the picture, and often in their criticisms he fancied that he had found this. He walked rapidly to the door of his studio, and in spite of his excitement he was struck by the soft light on Anna's figure as she stood in the shade of the entrance, listening to Golenishev, who was eagerly telling her something, while she evidently wanted to look round at the artist. He was himself unconscious how, as he approached them, he seized on this impression and absorbed it, and he had the chin of the shopkeeper who had sold him the cigars, and put it away somewhere to be brought out when he wanted it. The visitors, not agreeably impressed beforehand by Golenishev's account of the artist, were still less so by his personal appearance, thick-set and of middle height, with nimble movements, with his brown hat, olive green coat, and narrow trousers, though wide trousers had been a long while in fashion. Most of all, with the ordinariness of his broad face, and the combined expression of timidity and anxiety to keep up his dignity, Mikhailov made an unpleasant impression. "Please step in," he said, trying to look indifferent, and going into the passage he took a key out of his pocket and opened the door. End of chapter 10. Okay, chapter 10, we meet the artist, Mikhailov, and this is the artist that obviously Anna, Vronsky, and Golenishev are on their way to see. And we get a good look at his personality. His very essence is chaos, it seems. And also, like, all of the chaos that's going on inside of his head, it seems like it comes out and he puts blame on people that aren't necessarily to blame, like his wife, like his children, that sort of thing. But he also seems to be quite good at remembering features of people and able to put them on a figure and make that figure express exactly the idea that he wants it to be expressing. And so we get a little bit of that artistic side of him and how he is creating this figure and this expression. And then he goes off to meet with Anna, Vronsky, and Golenishev, and he is noticing all of their features as an artist does, and he picks out the ones that he particularly enjoys, like Golenishev's chin, and just stores it away in his little brain for later use. For later use. And at this point I'm wondering, okay, is this going to be a character that I'm going to have to care about, or is this a character that is just going to be here and then gone, and then we're not going to need to get super invested in the story with him? I don't know. I guess we'll find out. doing here? We're good. Chapter 11. On entering the studio, Mikhailov once more scanned his visitors and noticed down in his imagination Vronsky's expression, too, and especially his jaws. Although his artistic sense was unceasingly at work collecting materials, although he felt a continually increasing excitement as the moment of criticizing his work drew nearer, he rapidly and subtly formed from imperceptible signs a mental image of these three persons. That fellow, Galanishev, was a Russian living here. Mikhailov did not remember his surname, nor where he had met him, nor what he had said to him. He only remembered his face as he remembered all the faces he had ever seen. But he remembered, too, that it was one of the faces laid by in his memory in the immense class of the falsely consequential and poor in expression. The abundant hair and very open forehead gave an appearance of consequence to the face, which had only one expression, a petty, childish, peevish expression, concentrated just above the bridge of the narrow nose. Vronsky and Madame Karenina must be, Mikhailov supposed, distinguished and wealthy Russians, knowing nothing about art, like all those wealthy Russians, but posing as amateurs and connoisseurs. Most likely, they've already looked at all the antiques, and now they're making the round of the studios of the new people, the German humbug and the cracked pre-Raphaelite English fellows, and have only come to me to make the point of view complete, he thought. He was well acquainted with the way dilettanti have, the cleverer they were, the worse he found them, of looking at the works of contemporary artists with the sole object of being in a position to say that art is a thing of the past, and that the more one sees of the new men, the more one sees how inimitable the works of the great old masters have remained. He expected all this. He saw it all in their faces. He saw it in the careless indifference with which they talked among themselves, stared at the lay figures and busts, and walked about in leisurely fashion, waiting for him to uncover his picture. But, in spite of this, while he was turning over his studies, pulled up the blinds and taking off the sheet, he was in intense excitement, especially as, in spite of his conviction that all distinguished and wealthy Russians were certain to be beasts and fools, he liked Vronsky. And still more, Anna. "Here, if you please," he said, moving on one side with his nimble gait and pointing to his picture. "It's the exhortation of Pilate. Matthew chapter 27, he said, feeling his lips were beginning to tremble with emotion. He moved away and stood behind them. For the few seconds during which the visitors were gazing at the picture in silence, Mikhailov, too, gazed at it with indifferent eye of an outsider. For those few seconds he was sure, in anticipation, that a higher, juster criticism would be uttered by them, by those very visitors whom he had been so despising a moment before. He forgot all he had thought about his picture before during the 3 years he had been painting it. He forgot all its qualities which had been absolutely certain to him. He saw the picture with their indifferent, new, outside eyes and saw nothing good in it. He saw in the foreground Pilate's irritated face and the serene face of Christ, and in the background the figures of Pilate's retinue and the face of John watching what was happening. Every face that, with such agony, such blunders and corrections, had grown up within in him, with its special character, every face that had given him such torments and such raptures, and all those faces so many times transposed for the sake of the harmony of the whole, all the shades of color and tones that he had attained with his labor, All of this together seemed to him now, looking at it with their eyes, the merest vulgarity, something that had been done 1,000 times over. The face dearest to him, the face of Christ, the center of the picture which had given him such ecstasy as it unfolded itself to him, was utterly lost to him when he glanced at the picture with their eyes. He saw a well-painted, no, not even that, he distinctly saw now a mass of defects. Repetition of those endless Christs of Titian, Raphael, Rubens, and the same soldiers and Pilate. It was all common, poor and stale, and positively badly painted, weak and unequal. They would be justified in repeating hypocritically civil speeches in the presence of the painter and pitying him and laughing at him when they were alone again. The silence, though it lasted no more than a minute, became too intolerable to him. To break it, and to show he was not agitated, he made an effort and addressed Golenishev. "I think I've had the pleasure of meeting you," he said, looking uneasily first at Anna, then at Vronsky, in fear of losing any shade of their expression. "To be sure, we met at Rossi's. Do you remember? At that soirée when that Italian lady recited the new Rachel?" Golenishev answered easily, removing his eyes without the slightest regret from the picture and turning to the artist. Noticing, however, that Mikhailov was expecting a criticism of the picture, he said, "Your picture has got a great deal since I saw it last time, and what strikes me particularly now, as it did then, is the figure of Pilate. One so knows the man, a good-natured, capital fellow, but an official through and through, who does not know what it is he's doing, but I fancy all." Mihailov's mobile face beamed at once. His eyes sparkled. He tried to say something, but he could not speak for excitement, and pretended to be coughing. Low as was his opinion of Golenishev's capacity for understanding art, trifling as was the true remark upon the fidelity of the expression of Pilate as an official, and offensive as might have seemed the utterance of so unimportant an observation, while nothing was said of more serious points, Mikhailov was in an ecstasy of delight at this observation. He had himself thought about Pilate's figure just what Golenishev said. The fact that this reflection was but one of millions of reflections, which, as Mikhailov knew for certain would be true, did not diminish for him the significance of Golenishev's remark. His heart warmed to Golenishev for his remark, and from a state of depression he suddenly passed to ecstasy. At once the whole of his picture lived before him in all the indescribable complexity of everything living. Mikhailov again tried to say that that was how he understood Pilate, but his lips quivered intractably, and he could not pronounce the words. Vronsky and Anna, too, said something in that subdued voice in which, partly to avoid hurting the artist's feelings, and partly to avoid saying out loud something silly, so easily said when talking of art. People usually speak at exhibitions of pictures. Mikhailov fancied that the picture had made an impression on them, too. He went up to them. "How marvelous Christ's expression is," said Anna. Of all she saw, she liked that expression most of all, and she felt that it was the center of the picture, and so praise of it would be pleasant to the artist. "One can see that. He is pitying Pilate." This, again, was one of the million true reflections that could be found in his picture and in the figure of Christ. She said that he was pitying Pilate. In Christ's expression there ought to be indeed an expression of pity, since there is an expression of love, of heavenly peace, of readiness for death, and a sense of the vanity of words. Of course, there is the expression of an official in Pilate and of pity in Christ. seeing that one is the incarnation of the fleshly, and of the other of the spiritual life. All this and much more flashed into Mikhailov's thoughts. Yes, and how that figure is done, what atmosphere. One can walk round it, said Golenishev, unmistakably betraying by this remark that he did not approve of the meaning and idea of the figure. Yes, there's a wonderful mastery, said Vronsky. How those figures in the background stand out. There you have technique, he said, addressing Golenishev, alluding to a conversation between them about Vronsky's despair of attaining this technique. Yes, marvelous, Golenishev and Anna assented. In spite of the excited condition in which he was, the sentence about technique had sent a pang to Mikhailov's heart, and looking angrily at Vronsky, he suddenly scowled. He had often heard this word technique, and was utterly unable to understand what was understood by it. He knew that by this term was understood a mechanical facility for painters or drawing, entirely apart from its subject. He had noticed often that even in actual praise, technique was opposed to essential quality, as though one could paint well something that was bad. He knew that a great deal of attention and care was necessary in taking off the coverings to avoid injuring the creation itself, and to take off all the coverings. But there was no art of painting, no technique of any sort about it. If to a little child or to his cook were revealed what he saw, it or she would have been able to peel the wrappings off what was seen. And the most experienced and adroit painter could not by mere mechanical facility paint anything if the lines of the subject were not revealed to him first. Besides, he saw that if it came to talking about technique, it was impossible to praise him for it. In all he had painted and repainted, he saw faults that hurt his eyes, coming from want of care in taking off the wrappings, faults he could not correct now without spoiling the whole. And in almost all the figures and faces he saw, too, remnants of the wrappings not perfectly removed that spoiled the picture. One thing might be said, if you will allow me to make the remark, observed Golenishev. Oh, I shall be delighted, I beg you, said Mikhailov with a forced smile. That is, that you make him the man-god and not the god-man, but I know that was what you meant to do. I cannot paint a Christ that is not in my heart, said Mikhailov gloomily. Yes, but in that case, if you will allow me to say what I think, your picture is so fine that my observation cannot detract from it, and, besides, it is only my personal opinion. With you, it is different. Your very motive is different. But let us take Ivanov. I imagine that if Christ is brought down to the level of an historical character, it would have been better for Ivanov to select some other historical subject, fresh, untouched. But if this is the greatest subject presented to art, if one looked, one would find others. But the point is that art cannot suffer doubt and discussion, and before the picture of Ivanov the question arises for the believer and the unbeliever alike, is it God or is it not God? And the unity of the impression is destroyed. Why so? I think that for educated people, said Mikhailov, the question cannot exist. Golenishev did not agree with this, and confounded Mikhailov by his support of his first idea of the unity of the impression being essential to art. Mikhailov was greatly perturbed, but he could but he could say nothing in defense of his own idea. End of chapter 11. Okay, we have a whole bunch of highfalutin art talk. But it is interesting, like we have the typical what people say who don't know anything about art, what they say about art, and we have the people who do know art and how they react to art, and how a lot of artists themselves are just mimicking other artists without actually coming up with anything new. And I don't know how to talk about art, and I don't know how to talk about technique, which Mikhailov has talked about. Like, people talk about technique, but what does that really mean when technique is brought in? Is it just merely the ability of the actual drawing or the actual, painter? Or is technique, something far more different? And I just think that that is so interesting, and just like art itself is very subjective and put up to a bunch of different interpretations, and I think even the same person can interpret the same art differently at a different point in their life. And that's kind of like what we're getting here, is just like a whole other circle that we are being enveloped into, and that is the envelope of artists and the art world. And yeah, it's just another part of the culture that we haven't really touched on in this book yet. So here we have it. Maybe that's what's going to be Mikhailov's purpose, is just bringing in like, and there's art, like that part of the story, to just give like a fuller like representation of, Russia and during this time period, and the culture during this time period, and what that is like. So yeah. Okay, we will do one more chapter. Let's go. Chapter 12. Anna and Vronsky had long been exchanging glances, regretting their friend's flow of cleverness. At last, Vronsky, without waiting for the artist, walked away to another small picture. Oh, how exquisite! What a lovely thing! A gem! How exquisite! They cried with one voice. What is it they're so pleased with? Thought Mikhailov. He had positively forgotten that picture he had painted 3 years ago. He had forgotten all the agonies and the ecstasies he had lived through with that picture, when for several months it had been the one thought haunting him day and night. He had forgotten, as he always forgot, the pictures he had finished. He did not even like to look at it, and had only brought it out because he was expecting an Englishman who wanted to buy it. Oh, that's only an old study, he said. How fine, said Golenishev, he too, with unmistakable sincerity, falling under the spell of the picture. 2 boys were angling in the shade of a willow tree. The elder had just dropped in the hook and was carefully pulling the float from behind a bush, entirely absorbed in what he was doing. The other, a little younger, was lying in the grass, leaning on his elbows with his tangled flaxen head in his hands, staring at the water with his dreamy blue eyes. What was he thinking of? The enthusiasm over this picture stirred some of the old feeling for it in Mikhailov, but he feared and disliked this waste of feeling for things past, and so, even though his praise was grateful to him, he tried to draw his visitors away to a third picture. But Vronsky asked whether the picture was for sale. To Mikhailov, at that moment, excited by visitors, it was extremely distasteful to speak of money matters. It is put up there to be sold, he answered, scowling gloomily. When the visitors had gone, Mikhailov sat down opposite the picture of Pilate and Christ, and in his mind went over what he had said, what had been said, and what though not said, had been implied by those visitors. And strange to say, what had had such weight with him while they were there, and while he mentally put himself at their point of view, suddenly lost all importance for him. He began to look at his pictures with all his own full artist vision, and was soon in that mood of conviction, of perfectibility, and so of the significance of his picture, a conviction essential to the most intense fervor, excluding all other interests, in which alone he could work. Christ's foreshortened leg was not right, though. He took his palette and began to work. As he corrected the leg, he looked continually at the figure of John in the background, which his visitors had not even noticed, but which he knew was beyond perfection. When he had finished the leg, he wanted to touch that figure, but he felt too much excited for it. He was equally unable to work when he was cold, and when he was too much affected and saw everything too much. There was only one stage in the transition from coldness to inspiration at which work was possible. Today he was too much agitated. He would have covered the picture, but he stopped, holding the cloth in his hand, and, smiling blissfully, gazed a long while at the figure of John. At last, as it were regretfully tearing himself away, he dropped the cloth and, exhausted but happy, went home. Vronsky, Anna, and Glenishev, on their way home, were particularly lively and cheerful. They talked of Mihailov and his pictures, the word talent, by which they meant in inborn, almost physical, aptitude apart from brain and heart, and in which they tried to find an expression for all the artist had gained from life, recurred particularly often in their talk, as though it were necessary for them to sum up what they had no conception of, though they wanted to talk of it. They said that there was no denying his talent, but that his talent could not develop for want of education, the common defect of our Russian artists. But the picture of the boys had imprinted itself on their memories, and they were continually coming back to it. What an exquisite thing! How he has succeeded in it, and how simply. He doesn't even comprehend how good it is. Yes, I mustn't let it slip. I must buy it, said Vronsky. End of chapter 12. Okay, sort of like the interim of Anna, Vronsky, and Glenishev meeting the artist, in that they have left, and Anna, Vronsky, and Glenishev are just talking about how brilliant and talented Mikhailov is and how wonderful his paintings are, and Vronsky ends it by saying, like, I need to buy this painting, like, I need it from him. And Vronsky, after they leave, is looking at a picture that he finished 3 years ago and kind of forgot about, because once it's a picture that he finishes, he just instantly forgets about it because it's not at the forefront of his mind, and he's already moved on, and he's a different person now after having finished the painting than he was when he started. So he has all of that rattling around. So he goes back to the painting and he actually makes adjustments to it. He fixes Christ's leg because it's a little wonky. And there's a figure in the back. Joseph is in the back, and he fixes Joseph, even though they didn't mention him. They're like, ugh. Or Mikhailov is like, obviously this is imperfect and I must fix it. So he does little tweaks. And that's where it ends. And it kind of brings up the idea and the question of knowing when to stop with something, you know what I mean? Like with art, knowing when to stop, or knowing when to let something be, or to rest, or to give it time and then come back to it. I think that that's interesting. And I think the growth of an artist, or the growth of fill in the blank, is interesting as well, because like we as people are different from who we were 3 years ago, but we are also different in whatever craft or work that we have. Like we've grown both as humans and both as non-humans. But
that is where we are going to end tonight.
It has been a pleasure, as always. Whether you lurk, whether you chat, I 1000% appreciate you, and I 1000% appreciate your support. If I don't see you next time, I hope to see you very soon. Bye.